12,000 years ago, on a remote hillside in southeastern Turkey, a group of people did something that still seems almost unbelievable. They cut 50-ton blocks of stone with astonishing precision, set them out in careful astronomical alignment, and then deliberately buried the whole thing under the earth. Archaeologists have spent 3 decades trying to work out how and why. Before getting into the real findings, it's worth addressing something that has been spreading fast online. Clips with titles along the lines of Grok AI finally reveals who built Göbekli Tepe. The answer, rewrites history, have racked up millions of views across YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Viewers have taken this to mean an AI has uncovered proof of a lost advanced civilization or even extraterrestrial involvement. That's not what happened. When Grok was actually pointed at decades of published archaeological work on the site, it didn't produce some radical new theory. It simply repeated what researchers have openly admitted. For 30 years, a lot of the biggest questions about Göbekli Tepe still don't have firm answers. That's the honest, unglamorous truth. What's actually happening at the site, though, is arguably more compelling than any of the viral claims. Fresh excavation work between 2024 and 2026 really is reshaping how we think about early human history, and it's happening through slow, careful fieldwork and peer-reviewed analysis, not through aliens or lost civilizations. Göbekli Tepe sits on a ridge in Upper Mesopotamia, close to the city of Şanlıurfa. Its name simply means potbelly hill in Turkish, a modest name for a genuinely staggering site. What makes it extraordinary isn't its size, but its age, built more than 11,000 years ago by hunter-gatherer communities. It predates Stonehenge by roughly 7,000 years. When it was built, the pyramids were still millennia away, agriculture barely existed anywhere, and no one had yet invented writing, the wheel, or metal tools. Its signature feature is a series of massive shaped limestone pillars, some nearly 20 feet tall, and weighing up to 50 tons, about the mass of 10 cars. They're arranged in circular and oval enclosures that clearly reflect deliberate design, and many are carved with detailed images of lions, foxes, gazelles, birds, and scorpions, along with abstract symbols. The craftsmanship, given the tools available at the time, is remarkable. The site lay buried and forgotten for thousands of years. A survey in the 1960s by teams from Istanbul and Chicago noted flint tools scattered on the surface but missed the monumental architecture entirely. It wasn't until 1994 that German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, touring Neolithic sites in the region, recognized what he was looking at. He would go on to spend the next 2 decades excavating and studying the site. Schmidt's research overturned a long-standing model of how civilization was supposed to develop: hunter-gatherers first, then agriculture, then settlements, then social complexity, and only afterward, monuments and religion. Göbekli Tepe didn't fit that sequence at all. It was built by people with no agriculture, no permanent villages, and no metal tools, who nonetheless produced sophisticated architecture. Aligned with the sky, Schmidt's interpretation was that it functioned as a pilgrimage site where scattered groups gathered seasonally for ritual feasts, a theory supported by the more than 100,000 animal bone fragments found there, evidence of large communal meals. Schmidt died in 2014 at 60, in the middle of an active dig season, and never saw many of the discoveries that would later complicate his own theory. After his death, the project continued under Muslim Erkin of the Şanlıurfa Museum and Lee Clare of the German Archaeological Institute, with Necmi Karl of Istanbul University taking over as director in 2020. The 2025 season produced some striking finds. Archaeologists uncovered a life-size human figure deliberately built into a wall between 2 of the site's enclosures. Not a small carving, but a full statue with distinct facial and body detail set horizontally into the structure. Turkey's Minister of Culture and Tourism, Mehmet Nuri Ersoy, announced the find during a visit to the site, noting that similar figures had turned up at the nearby site of Karahan Tepe, but that this discovery was especially significant for understanding Göbekli Tepe's own culture. It's thought to have served as a ritual offering or as a way of honoring ancestors or important figures in the community. More significant, though, was the discovery of grinding stones, flint sickles, and plant residue pointing to organized food processing. Not the kind of equipment you'd expect at a site used only for occasional seasonal gatherings. Combined with evidence of residential structures, this points toward people living at or near the site for extended periods, possibly year-round rather than Schmidt's picture of a purely seasonal meeting ground. That matters for a much bigger reason. It suggests religion and monumental building may have come before agriculture and settlement, not after the reverse of what the traditional model assumed. It's possible that the pull of a shared sacred site and the gatherings it drew created the conditions that eventually led people to settle down and start farming rather than farming, creating the surplus that made temples possible. In 2024, Martin Sweatman of the University of Edinburgh published research in the journal Time and Mind examining the V-shaped marks carved into the pillars. His analysis suggests each V may represent a single day. And on Pillar 43, in Enclosure D, the count comes to 365, matching a full solar year. Sweatman's work goes further, proposing this wasn't just record-keeping for its own sake. He links some of the carvings to the Taurid meteor stream and argues the calendar may have been created in response to a catastrophic comet impact around 10850 BCE, meaning these carvers weren't only tracking days and seasons, but apparently understood that Earth periodically crosses paths with cometary debris. The layout of the pillars themselves also appears to align with sunrise and sunset at the equinoxes, and some carvings may correspond to constellations, suggesting the complex doubled as an astronomical observation site. Story is the ending. At some point, the people who built and used the site chose to fill the enclosures with soil and rubble and bury the whole complex. This wasn't neglect or decay. It looks like a deliberate, labor-intensive act. Why remains unclear. Some researchers think it marked the end of the site's spiritual purpose and a symbolic closing of an era. Others see it as an intentional act of preservation, a kind of time capsule. Still others point to environmental or social upheaval. There's no consensus. What is certain is that it stayed buried for roughly 8,000 years until Schmidt found it in 1994. The site is now a UNESCO World Heritage location. And by late 2025, Turkey had opened a new visitor center, expanded parking, and dedicated walking paths for controlled public access. The active excavation areas remain off limits. It's reachable via Şanlıurfa, about 15 kilometers away. For those who can't travel to Turkey, an exhibition called Myths in Stone Göbekli Tepe, in the World of the Last Hunters, following a run at Rome's Colosseum that drew over 6 million visitors, opened at Berlin's James Simon Gallery in February 2026 and runs through July 2026, featuring 96 artifacts from the Şanlıurfa Museum, including material from the most recent digs. The straightforward answer: Neolithic hunter-gatherers, possibly with a semi-settled population living on or near the site. The harder part is what that implies. 20th century archaeology largely assumed that monumental architecture, religion, and complex knowledge systems were things only settled. Agricultural societies could produce that surplus food, enabled specialization. And specialization produced priests, builders, and artists. By that logic, Göbekli Tepe shouldn't exist, but it does, which means that logic needs revising. What the site actually shows is that early humans were capable of remarkable, creative, spiritual, and intellectual achievement without agriculture or permanent settlement, that the drive to build something meaningful together isn't a byproduct of economic development, but something more fundamental to how humans work. Necmi Karl, the current excavation director, has been blunt in rejecting fringe theories about aliens, lost civilizations, or time portals, insisting the fieldwork points only to human builders. None of this needs artificial intelligence, ancient astronauts, or hidden portals to be extraordinary. It's extraordinary because ordinary people, more than 12,000 years ago, gathered, built, carved, tracked the sky, and then buried it all, leaving behind a monument that's still forcing us to rethink what we assumed about our own history.